FISA as we know it, I think is fair to say, is dead. And what the House and the Senate have come up with is a compromise, is that they'll come together to try and come up with compromise legislation. But what's interesting to me is that basically the Department of Justice said if you need the outside counsel, you basically cannot utilize something like FISA anyways, and they could just use – it would be better for them to use the laws that they already have for intelligence gathering and surveillance. What is clear in Washington, D.C. is that folks are not ready to just give this blanket power back to the executive branch right now because of the issues of Jim Comey's use, Andrew McCabe's use, Peter Strzok's use. You go down the line.
This is the opportunity to do it right, and I was glad that the Department of Justice acknowledged that. And look, the White House, I mean, there's just no way that you can refute the concerns that they have. This process was abused, and the idea of reauthorizing it without making sure that those who abused it are not only held accountable, but then that future people can't abuse it the same way, Jordan, that absolutely should not happen. As much as I think the FISA tools are important for law enforcement, I think the reforms are actually going to have to go a bit too far initially in order for the FISA court, or whatever it's called eventually. I like your idea actually of rebuilding it from the ground up, calling it something different. But Jordan, they're going to have to build that trust back. So for a time, do we have to give an advocate in that courtroom access to all of the information in every case that involves a U.S. citizen and let them defend that U.S. citizen until they build trust back? In my view, Jordan, we do.
They lied to FISA, remember? They lied. They used the Steele dossier. They knew it was wrong. But they used that to get their FISA spy warrants. And then they said, well, see, FISA approved what we did. And the problem is FISA was a rubber stamp. When you had 99.9% approval, the only way that works in any kind of legal system is either the FBI has no issues at all and they are 100% accurate and they were only dealing with foreign terrorists and foreign actors, but suddenly you realize their focus was how do we get at Americans by utilizing FISA? And Americans, we have different rights because we have those rights guaranteed to us as citizens by the Constitution of the United States.
FISA has been used successfully in the past to track terrorists abroad. It's why the law was created, but it was a very narrow scope, and the way it was used was supposed to be in a way that only applied to terrorists or Americans who were abroad fighting with terrorists, not to spy on a candidate for president or people that were working around him.
The authorizing statute here is literally called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The entire purpose was to have a tool to surveil foreigners. Now, there were sometimes Americans that were picked up into it, but that was supposed to be secondary. Jordan, in this case, they turned that absolutely on its head. The goal here was to surveil and target American citizens, including the incoming president of the United States, including his aides, his advisors. It wasn't necessarily the process that was broken, but how the process was used. And Jordan, look, I'm really not that concerned if the intelligence community goes into a secret process and has picked up a foreigner that is engaged in terrorist activities, whether or not that person has a forceful advocate in the room. But once an American is picked up, especially if it's an American that is part of the incoming administration, if that person is roped into the process, Jordan, the idea that that American would not be afforded representation inside that room.
It's not, again, that they don't want this ability in the hands of the U.S. to deal with terrorism. But Mike Flynn, in that situation was never about terrorism. It was about policy disputes, legitimate policy disputes. American people decide who to elect, and then those people who we elect decide who they want to advise them. And you get to decide every 4 years the case of the president, every 6 years the case of a senator, every 2 for members of the House. And again, your governors, local, you get to decide. If you don't like who they have advising them and their policy positions, you decide to remove them.